Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's my pleasure today to be here with Santa Barbara City Planning Commissioner Jay Higgins, who's also a private land use planner and who's done a lot of good work here in the community and who serves on one of the most influential boards in the city, really a highly sought after position that makes recommendations to the city council, makes some decisions. And we're going to talk about all kinds of good stuff going on in Santa Barbara today as it relates to housing, hotels, downtown planning, just sort of these issues that we're struggling with. Jay Higgins, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Josh. Thanks for inviting me in.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I wish we could chat more. You know how I work. It seems as though I need a comment, a question on deadline, and it's like I need it right now. And we don't do enough of the conversation, the day-to-day stuff. So I appreciate you taking a few minutes to sit down and talk with me. Jay, there's a lot going on in Santa Barbara. You serve on the Planning Commission. You're one of the elders there. I think you've been there, a long time. You know what you're doing. You've seen everything come up, and you're kind of the words of wisdom on that panel, on that board, along with Sheila Lodge, of course, who's been there. And I wanted to sort of talk to you a little bit about these issues that we're dealing with right now. Let's talk about one of the big things that has come up. Councilwoman Megan Harmon has floated this idea of a tax maybe to fund hotels, maybe an increase on the TOT tax to fund hotels. Simultaneously, there's talk about a moratorium on new hotel development. And there's all this sort of conversation of how do we afford or how do we fund housing? We got Rob Fredericks who's talking about this issue. And there's sort of all this conversation going on around housing and how to connect it to maybe the tourist industry and hotels. You see this stuff, you see these projects, you're constantly talking about them. Let's dive deep. What is your take? What do you think? What is Santa Barbara's solution when it comes to hotels, housing? What do you think is the best way to sort of approach this situation?
Well, you hold on one second.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that Megan floated an idea about hotels or housing. And, one thing that is constant for me in the last 7 years, and really for anybody that's been paying attention to housing politics over the last 50 years, is that we are always talking about housing.
Mm-hmm.
So there isn't a time where we aren't talking about what to do or how to handle affordability and issues with State Street. So on the Planning Commission for the last 7 years, we've had dozens and dozens of hearings about what to do, how to amend the AUD program. And so that's a constant, how to deal with ideas that come up and react to them. And some would argue that's not a very strategic approach. Really, you shouldn't put yourself in a position to constantly react to ideas that come up, crazy or not. You really should just have a sound strategy, collect your thoughts, make a plan, and then implement the plan and maybe adaptively tweak it if necessary. But you asked me, or it sounded like you asked me a ton of questions there. So I guess specifically, we can just talk about the latest zany idea, which is a moratorium on hotel development. Yeah. Which is odd and ironic that we're talking about that simultaneously, as you said, with a potential increase in TOT taxes. So I don't know how we do both of those, but I think that's a good example of the context within which we operate at the Planning Commission. We get zany ideas all the time and they conflict with each other. So we can't do both of those things. And I think we should do neither. I don't think there's a nexus between a hotel moratorium and affordability. The people, generally speaking, that work, lower wage earners that are in the hotel industry, I don't believe they really, on the majority standpoint, don't live in Santa Barbara. That ship sailed 30 years ago. Our low income wage folks are commuting, and they've been commuting at least from Goleta or Lompoc or Ventura County for decades. So I don't see that as a good idea. There's no nexus there. It's also a bad financial or fiscal idea. We have a lot of money that comes into the city's general fund from TOT tax. In fact, I think this year, maybe you can fact check this, might be a record. They might collect $30 million annually from TOT tax. And the way the TOT tax program is structured is you're a no risk investor. The city is. They approve hotels, the hotels gets built, and the city automatically puts 12% of the gross receipts in their pocket. They don't have to invest anything other than their time to vet a hotel project. So I think where this thing got cross purposes is there was an idea that we shouldn't have a hotel moratorium. We should in fact increase TOT taxes or allocate more TOT taxes to affordable housing. Mm-hmm. So while that might be a good idea in a vacuum, I don't think that's a good idea either. And I'll tell you why. I mean, first of all, we should always have money for affordable housing, and our city's housing authority does a fantastic job. Best probably program run in the country. But let me back up for a second. About probably 8 years ago, and you might have been in this housing conference that was put on by the Housing Coalition. There's probably 150 people in the room, and Mickey Flax is there. And Mickey Flax, is one of the most smartest, most principled, most crazy persons I know. And she got up and said something that was ridiculous and radical, that we shouldn't be building anymore. We shouldn't let the private sector solve our housing crisis. We should only let public agencies build housing. Mm-hmm. And everybody in the room thought that was crazy, but lo and behold, we're heading that direction, right? On two fronts. One, with AUD, by constantly increasing the inclusionary rate, it's de facto government housing. And now, if we want to do a program where we increase taxes to fund affordable housing construction, that might be well and good, but it really diminishes. I think it'll take away from the private sector's ability to solve our housing crisis. We will start to only rely on public housing construction in this community if we head that direction. So we already have an AUD program that has been beaten up to a point that it's not used anymore, constantly tweaked to the point that it's hard for applicants or developers to inform themselves of the rules and then apply for a project and stay on track. It's almost impossible. So anyways, that's a long answer to your question.
This issue came up because we're seeing hotel projects in development. We've seen proposals to build new hotels, conversions in some case of commercial space into hotels. There's that one commercial office space right next to, I think it's the Laguna Cottages, that got some attention recently, and there's some seniors who live next door. So the context of, hey, this is a building and we need to do infill housing because there's no more space to do housing in terms of open space. So we should take these opportunities to facilitate development on these properties where there's already stuff there. And so I think some of the pushback from BB Longstreet and others who had concerns about that commercial development to be turned into a keyless hotel was, hey, that should be housing, And so what do you think about that? Is there a way to navigate that where developers are?
That's a great subject and question. Would it be better that building become housing? Yes, than hotels, in my personal opinion. Yeah. But everybody has to understand, when an owner of real estate wants to make a change to their property, they're going to do it in in a way that is that has the least amount of risk.
Mhm.
So for that project to become housing would have increased the risk profile to a point that if you didn't have to go through that amount of risk, and I mean regulatory risk, and I also mean financial risk, building code risk, why not just do the thing that is the least, has the lowest amount of risk profile and the greatest return on investment? I mean, that's real simple. So putting a moratorium on conversions like that should only be a consideration if you have what you really want, which is housing, and you have a program that offers less risk than the hotel process.
Mhm.
So why not allow people to come in and just simply get a building permit to do a TI project for housing there? Nobody wants that either. Everybody wants to regulate the housing and the prices and the rent control on the housing. So it's too complicated. So I don't blame the guy, whoever it is, to take that path. I can agree that it's not highest and best use for our city, but until we create rules that are simple to follow and untinkered with for at least a decade, if the only kind of moratorium we should have is a moratorium on amending our housing ordinances. Okay, AUD should be put in place, and then we should let it sit there for 10 years and be utilized. And there shouldn't be any more hearings on housing for at least 10 years.
Too much tweaking and changing, and
it's impossible to understand what the rules are.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise that that's what happened.
This other talk of increasing the transit occupancy tax or taking a percentage of that 12%. We've heard Rob Fredericks talk about this at budget hearings. What do you think of that? I mean, is there a way to take some of that money from your perspective that the tourists are giving in? You know, can we go to 13%, 14, 15? I don't know what Malibu or these other places are doing, and put that aside. Is that an answer, or will we, as Randy Rouse would say, kill the golden goose that lays the egg? Like, is that not gonna work for our tourism?
No, I don't think that's. I mean, like I said, in a vacuum, I think if we can figure out a way to get more money to the housing authority, that's always going to be a win-win. Mm-hmm. Okay, where it comes from is the question. I think globally speaking or nationally speaking, we're heading into uncertain times economically, and so we really have to think hard about raising taxes right now. What's the push and pull on that equation going to yield? Are you really, if you're going to raise it 2%, how much more money is that going to be leveraged for the housing authority? What can they produce? I'd like to see somebody talk about that, and then we can make a decision. But generally adverse to tax increases. So.
Yeah, so there's that whole conversation that's happening, and we're seeing AUD projects, we're seeing housing projects. The city of Santa Barbara is doing the one at the corner of Carrillo and Castillo, which seems to be favorable to everybody. It's a good use, and it's going to serve that missing middle, and going to lose a lot of trees, but most of the neighbors are good with it. And if you can't put housing there, where can you put it, kind of thing. So it seems like that's moving in the right direction. But without getting specific, because I know you've got to potentially vote on some of these projects, but I wrote about this Funk Zone project. It's 155 units a couple days ago. That was, I think, at HABR or something like that. And we're sort of see these pushing the envelope here of, I wanted a development agreement. We saw it on Milpas with that project. This other person wants a development agreement, 45 feet, 48 feet, wanting an exception and going higher and higher, 52 feet. When you look at that, and we see these projects come in and they're getting more dense and higher, is that a good thing from your perspective? Is that the answer to the housing, or it just depends on where it is?
I'll answer it this way. 12, 13 years ago, we had Measure B.
Mhm.
And that was a thought bubble by a couple of architects in town as a reaction to Chapala 1, because that building went up in the air and it was very tall, and everybody was afraid that Chapala Street was going to be canyonized with tall buildings. So they floated a ballot measure to reduce the building height limit. So in the downtown commercial areas, the height limit's 60 feet. And what happened was, ironically, the environmentalists and quite frankly, the Democrat, most of the liberal leaning people and organizations defeated Measure B. So the voters spoke on whether or not we should reduce height limits down to 45 feet, and they disagreed. And the reason was because it didn't make sense from a sustainability standpoint to not better utilize our downtown land for increased intensity with respect to either housing or commercial. But clearly it was a reaction that the voters agreed on to not limit downtown development in your urban grid. So I'm still staunchly in that camp that basically what happened through kind of a backdoor deal, while the voters didn't want the height limits reduced to 45 feet, the city council still figured out a way to lower the height limits to 45 feet by requiring that any project above 45 feet only be approved if it's got a community benefit component of it, of which rental housing is a community benefit. So anyway, long answer. I'm not afraid of tall buildings, going over 45 or 48 or 54 feet. That doesn't bother me.
Okay.
And it's not and it's because there's a balance. There's an aesthetic that is important, and our design review boards do an outstanding job at these buildings that come out, and they all look fantastic. I mean, ask yourself, and maybe you should ask some of your other panelists, have people been complaining about the new AUD projects on De La Guerra and Santa Barbara Street?
I think that the complaints I hear are rent, that it still costs a lot, but I never hear design.
Nobody's saying, hey, that's too tall and that's really ugly, right? I mean, those are stunning pieces of architecture, and our design review boards do a great job. And of course, the architects that are hired to design these things. So yeah, sure, the rents are higher than we would like, but isn't that the way with everything these days? We have high inflation and high gas prices and high rents. But the thing about the complaining that is being done about high rents, it's disingenuous, because if we didn't build any new buildings, no new apartments, rents would still be high. If we did nothing, the median home price would still be 2.6 million. And that's because rents are a factor and prices are a factor of what's happening in the national economy, not what we're doing in Santa Barbara. So if AUD projects were coming out of the ground in 2012, they would be much more affordable, but nothing is affordable now. So to measure the success of AUD projects on a 3-year horizon, based on what we all really want the rents to be, that's just disingenuous, and it's an unfair way to gauge the success of a program. You have to keep in mind, and I've said this on the Planning Commission a couple of times, we're not a 3-year commission, we're a planning commission. Planning departments, planning commissions, horizon needs to be 20 or 30 or 40 years. So the housing stock that is produced as a result of AUD now will be relatively affordable in 20 years. And that should be our horizon and our measurement of success. If we can look out that far and measure how we've improved our housing stock. Remember, we didn't improve our housing stock for 50 years, largely. So we're catching up, and we're now kind of creeping towards a better balance, assuming we keep over the next same time period, 10, 20, 30 years, keep building a reasonable amount of of apartment or condo product. And I don't mean we're never going to build our way out of this housing price issue, never ever. But we shouldn't do nothing. We're not a do nothing commission, we're a planning commission.
Yeah. You hear people talking about the redevelopment agency and back when Santa Barbara could have done this, and the state taking that away was a terrible thing. And so it's sort of like the new conversation among people running for office and people going to Sacramento, that's a touchstone point that they're trying to say that's going to be really helpful. Do you have any thoughts on that? You know, this program, it used to take property tax increment and it would set it aside and it could help fund the housing authority and redevelopment housing projects. And now that funding is gone. Do you have any, is that the answer?
Well, I like I said, I think any new funding source for the housing authority to produce more housing is a great idea. Yeah. So, but now I guess my recollection of what Newsom did or the state legislature did with redevelopment agencies is they took that money and they gave it to the schools. Yeah. So that's a tough one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's definitely the other side of that nobody talks about is all of the communities that didn't use their redevelopment money in a way that they should have. Santa Barbara did, you know, for many years, but not every state did, not every city did. Hey, let's talk about this commercial vacancy tax, which seems to be picking up some steam. I know that you are, you know, you work with a lot of these electeds who are pushing this sort of issue. It's a good elected issue to sort of say, hey, you know, we address downtown by we're going to charge these out of town property owners for letting their properties be vacant. They need to rent it out. They need to work with their tenants, their clients, so we can get somebody in there. They don't live here. They don't see the blight. They need to do something. We're going to tax them to incentivize them, right? So that you hear that conversation going, and of course, State Street, you can't walk very far without seeing a commercial storefront that's vacant. Is that an answer, Jay? How do we incentivize these property owners to get a tenant into their building?
Again, it's this regulatory whack-a-mole where we want to do a moratorium on hotels, but also penalize commercial property owners. What is uniformly recognized as what would be good for State Street is more people into the retail establishments, or just redevelopment or housing or a vibrancy on State Street is you just need people. So it doesn't make any sense to do a moratorium on hotels that are on State Street or near State Street, because what you want is somebody coming out of their hotel room looking for a cup of coffee in the morning, early in the morning. That energizes the street, and it probably has a indirect effect on homelessness, because homeless will encamp where there aren't people. So putting a vacancy tax on some of the retail establishments, I would entertain that. In certain circumstances, there's a notion that you do have some seriously absentee property owners or landlords, and if they are egregiously lazy or uninterested in engaging in the real estate market, then I suppose some sort of a penalty would be reasonable. But again, anytime you have a penalty, you gotta look at these things with a carrot and a stick. So what are we doing to incentivize, and what are we doing to penalize the stuff that we don't want? I think in certain circumstances that somebody's just been ghostwriting their building for 5 years, something needs to happen.
There's that building on the 400 block of State Street that Mike Jordan's always talking about. Others, I think it used to be Esau's. There used to be a restaurant there.
Yeah, that's
kind of an
example. Yeah,
that's an example, right? Like it's sort of mystery house. Like what's going on there behind that place that's walled off. You know, and we do know some property owners lower their rents to get some tenants in there. You know, my reporting, you hear that helps a small business, you know, get started. Ray Mahboob, I know, does that with some of his tenants. At least he tells me he does. And I've heard that from some of his tenants as well. that it's better to have something than nothing. But I guess if you're not here to see it, maybe it's some write-off or something.
I all I can say is I hear those anecdotes about the tax structure or disincentives and multiple generations owning the same property, and it's impossible to get. So excuse me, if there's needs to be a penalty of some kind after a certain period of time, I'd be interested in what it would fund. I would like to see it directly tied to law enforcement, or the ambassador program, or for prosecuting people that start fires in encampments.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, this fires, the highway fires and the encampment fires are untenable. I just can't. Every time they seem to be increasing in frequency, and it just boggles my mind that we let that happen.
Were you a supporter of the take them out of the encampments and put them in the Rose Garden Inn hotel for 6 months? Did that work, or was that just a temporary fix?
I would say that was an interesting experiment, and the nexus between being able to clear the encampments, needed a solid place to house those folks. And so if that's the legal framework we need to work within, it is what it is. I think I don't know too much about whether or not the Rose Garden Hotel project was a success. I live up there. I know it rattled some cages of people that live nearby, but I don't think it was, I think it was well managed. So I'm probably, I don't know, 6 blocks from that property. And I drive by it every once in a while, and I didn't notice any issues, but there probably was an uptick. Sure.
Yeah, I know Eric Friedman noticed all sorts of things that he talked about at the council, but Eric, he's a little closer. Yeah. Yeah.
Eric is probably the hardest working man at City Hall. Oh, he is very knowledgeable, and does his homework, and he's doing a good job.
I always tell him, sorry, Eric, I never quote you. It's nothing personal. It's because all your quotes are like actually on topic, and there's no grandstanding. So I have nothing flashy to quote from you.
Boring, but accurate, maybe. But anyway, exactly. Not a knock against Mike Jordan, who works very hard too.
I'm not going to talk about Mike Jordan quotes,
but he'll give you plenty to quote on.
Hey, let's go back to State Street. The commercial vacancy tax is because we have a number of storefronts that are vacant. And so the problem there is, tourists come to town and they see, well, what's there? Why is that empty? There also, some of them are provide shelter and refuge for homeless people to sort of hang out there and camp. And as we know, the city can't do anything really about that, because there's this, Ariel Calan will say the Boise decision, and that if you don't have a place for them to go, we can't tell them that they can't be there. So they kind of have to be there. It's public property unless they're causing a problem or a disturbance. And then that goes to law enforcement, and we don't have enough of that. And we can't hire enough ambassadors. So it's this whole cycle. So State Street, when you're down there, when you go, do you still go down there? Do you feel like it's safe, or do you feel like it's, we need to do something quickly? I mean, what is your take when you stroll on State Street? Are we in a better place today than we were a few years ago?
Well, I think the promenade issue, and we'll probably get to that, but has been helpful. Finally, State Street has become a destination in and of itself, without the retail or the bars or restaurants. So, when the pandemic hit, I got me and my family all on bikes, and we would ride to church down State Street, back up State Street, and it was really cool. And so, safe place to land. In the daytime. In the nighttime, not so much. So I do think we need more enforcement, more ambassadors on State Street. And CityNet's approach is, if you connect yourself on a relational level with somebody that's living on the street, eventually they will accept, most of them. Eventually, most of them will accept your assistance, or be annoyed to the point that they just move on. And that's an intentional strategy that CityNet deploys, and they've trained our ambassadors on the same level. So you get to know folks on the street by name, and eventually, wear them down.
Yeah,
That's all you can do.
Just keep trying.
It's a
It
tall
takes
order.
several contacts before
Yes.
they accept the services.
It's very high maintenance. But again, within the confines of our legal system, that program needs to be expanded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the State Street Promenade, of course, everyone has an opinion on this. I grew up in Goleta, Santa Barbara. My parents were renters, so I've lived in East Side, West Side, Nolita, Goleta, everywhere. So I remember the days like my parents, they go cruising on State Street. So like I'm old school, right? Like, and your friends would come into town, later in life, and you're like, let's go on State Street, let's go cruising. Like that was a cool thing, right? But obviously, we've always had this sense from planners and other people that maybe we need to remove cars from State Street. Maybe we need to figure out a way to make it more vibrant. The pandemic hits, and overnight, right? Rob Dayton makes it happen, and he had lots of support. A lot of the bike activists, alternative transportation activists, everything kind of converged. So State Street closed to cars, at least parts of it, and then we have the outdoor dining. And you're right. If you're down there, there is so much vibrancy. There's so many people. It's like, where were all these people before? And it's really people of all ages. It's not just one demographic, but it's kind of a mess. It looks messy. It's different. Some people have elaborate displays, some people less so. What's your take on the State Street Promenade? I don't even know. I mean, I'd have to think about where we're at. Like, what is this? Master plan, consultant, Dave Davis in charge. This thing's going to take how many years?
Right.
What's your take there on
well, I am not a part of that committee, so this is outsider perspective. That it's the Tess Harris, Dave Davis committee, and I'm really excited to hear what that process unveils. Why we need an outside consultant and why it would take 2 years to do that, I don't know. That seems like we don't do anything in the city without 2 years and a consultant. We have the most amount of talent in the planning department relative to other public agencies. And we have the most engaged public, the highest quality and quantitatively number of engaged boards and commissions in the country. So I don't know that we need a consultant, but again, I'm not part of that committee, so I'm not really on solid ground with my opinion, but I'll say I wish it could go a little faster.
Yeah.
And if it takes 2 years to do a plan, then it might take a long time to raise the money to implement whatever the plan entails. It could be significant costs for doing if we're going to allow parklets to remain in a way that's compliant with the building, health, and zoning codes, that's going to require a lot of infrastructure upgrades significantly. And so I do agree that it's hodgepodgey looking, better than nothing. And I'll say this about Rob Dayton. I'll get a little comment in about Rob.
Yeah.
He was an amazing person for getting something done in this city where it's really hard to get things done. Sorry to see him go, but I wish he was part of this process and committee, because we would be getting it done faster for sure. Again, whether or not we keep, I think we need to make a decision whether or not we're going to keep the parklets. That should be a big piece of the puzzle. Keeping the parklets and the vibrancy and the activity and the outdoor dining is an enhancement, but how to do it equitably in a way that's equitable for those people that don't have outdoor dining or don't want to do outdoor dining or a retail place. Yeah. I don't know how you do that in a way that's fair.
Yeah.
And, the government's been in the business of deciding winners and losers for a long time, despite what they might tell you. But so, if it is what it is, they're just going to give away public space. That's a choice that the city council can make. But in a typical framework like that, like we have at the harbor, the public lands down there are leased at a pretty high premium. And then there's a cost sharing that goes along with that. So if we set up a program for the parklet applicants to actually go through, it's going to cost them a lot if it's fair. And then are we setting people up for failure if they can't actually achieve all of the building health and safety code requirements through a process for them to be successful and keep being successful after they get their permit? So I don't know. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I feel like objectively, but I mean, this is pretty, I've said this before, it's not Paseo Nuevo all over again. I mean, it doesn't need to take forever. Like the promenade is a few blocks. I don't know why there's this elaborate planning issue, and we're going to lose time. And also stuff's going to change between now and then while you're planning. They're going to have to replan, but we'll see. Maybe Dave's got a master plan there and can figure it all out, and it'll be done by 2024.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what they come up with. So I'm sure it'll be a good plan.
What about the State Street underpass and some of those changes? You saw some of that. There's the artwork that they're going to try to make that more vibrant, and Jeff Shelton and all of that. What do you think of what that's going to look like? Is that goofy, or is that going to be good for Santa Barbara?
No, I think it'll be great. I think it'll be fantastic. I think taking it down, the road diet, taking it down to one lane and making it lighter and more approachable on a pedestrian scale and a cyclist scale is going to be fantastic. So, bridging the funk zone with downtown is a good objective.
Yeah. Hey, I want to ask you a couple questions about you, Jay, and how you got to be a planner. I was looking on your LinkedIn before this, and you're to UCSB, and you have a land use sort of background degree. You're obviously a private land use planner. How did you get to, are you from here? How'd you get to Santa Barbara? What was your route to this community?
Mostly by mistake. So I got into UCSB on like what they used to call provisional, where they said basically if you get straight A's your senior year, we'll let you in. And then I floated around UCSB for a couple of years undeclared, and then I didn't pay my tuition on time at the end of my sophomore year, so they kicked me out of all my classes. Had to find new classes, and the class that worked for my my undeclared status was an environmental studies class, and it really the penny dropped on environmental studies and primarily urban planning. I took a class from a guy named Paul Wack, and after that it was off to the races. So I worked for the Coastal Commission for a year. I was still in college. It was an internship, but that had turned me off of public sector. Real interesting culture, but it wasn't for me. So I went into the private sector and tried to help people get building permits and land use permits, and was immediately turned into a libertarian because of the bureaucracy that was shocking to me about how to, help people do what we have told them we want them to do with their properties, which is, what the zoning code says, and maybe what we want them to do from a property tax standpoint, or operate a business or build housing. We just make it hard on people. So it's a real interesting career choice for me because it's exciting and frustrating at the same point.
And where'd you grow up?
Oakland.
Okay.
And then we moved to Chico and Santa Cruz. But primarily a California kid.
So you didn't want to, when you were growing up in Oakland, you weren't like, I want to be a planner one day, an urban planner. You kind of weren't sure what you wanted to do. Is that fair? Or you kind of environmental studies, or
100%? No clue.
What do your parents do?
My father was a lawyer, and my mom is in sales. She could sell snow to an Eskimo. Is that the right expression? Or ice? I don't know.
Ice. Yeah.
She's been in real estate and fashion sales for her whole life. In fact, still works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're like one of these people who went to UCSB and you found your calling. You had a great teacher, and then you decided to stay in this community. I mean, did you just fall in love with the climate and the geography of everything and decide to work here?
That was unintentional too. I mean, I got out of college in '91, and there was a recession then, and I couldn't find a job.
Mhm.
So I had all kinds of odd jobs, digging ditches literally, and working retail and lifeguard and stuffing envelopes. So, but I did finally get a real job working for a developer in 1992. But that set me on the road. I travel a lot for work. And for work, I moved out of Santa Barbara to San Francisco and Hawaii and all parts Southeast part of the country for a long time, but sort of happenstance, got a job back in Santa Barbara in 97, and then I've been here ever since.
And you never wanted to sell out and go work for the city, the government, guaranteed benefits, all that? No?
I think they call it what I did, selling out, working for the private sector. But no, there's all kinds of 2020 hindsight on that, because a lot of the colleagues I have that are my age now that went and stayed in public sector are retiring. Yeah. And that sure looks good to me right now. But I still get excited to go to work every day. It is ultimately it's fun helping people put puzzles together, try to get them through the process. So I enjoy what I do.
Yeah. And I want to, you mentioned libertarian, and I want to sort of maybe just give you a little bit of space to talk about this. As a journalist, I cover these issues, and so often people want to demonize developers, property owners. They want to say you're rich, you're wealthy, you want to be richer, more wealthy, and you're doing it at the expense of people who are trying to make it work from the working class in the community. You hear that. That's the narrative. And it's always like, well, why don't you do less? And can't you just make a little bit of less, and therefore somebody else could be part of this community? Even in the context of the housing, right? There's people who are saying we can't have the people who serve the community, the housekeepers, the people who work in the back of house, the service industry employees. We can't have them living outside of Santa Barbara, because that's not good for their lives and their families and their time with their kids and their congestion and environment and all these things. So let's figure out a way. And so often it becomes this issue of like good versus bad, right? Like if you're a renter, you're good. If you're a property owner, you're an evil property owner. And you have to deal with that. Of course, you're on the planning commission, and you get a taste of public service and all of that stuff and that conversation. Can you talk about that? I mean, Jay Higgins and other libertarians in property management, they're not the problem. You're not the evil ones. You're not the bad guys. It's not like you only want this to be a community for the rich. You've heard all those things. Can you talk about just like where you stand on that fundamental issue and just sort of clear the air? Because there's a lot of people who are going to watch this and be like, oh, he's got his, so he's good. Can you talk about that?
I might need you to ask that question again because it's a mouthful. But one thought I have. Are
you a bad guy, Jay, because you're a developer and you aren't advocating for TOT tax to go fund affordable housing? How about that?
Okay. Well, I certainly hope. I mean, I guess I can't control what people think of me, but I fundamentally am trying to navigate people through a process that want to do something to their properties, and that will always bring out a neighbor that doesn't want something to change. So there's an inherent tension there, no matter what you're doing to your property. I have my next door to my residence was sold, and it's being remodeled, and there's going to be an ADU on it. The guy that bought it is a developer, and he'll end up flipping it. Nice guy. I happen to enjoy talking to him, and he's very afraid of the risk associated with the process. And we talked quite a bit about how long it took him to get his permit. That was challenging for him. Something very simple, something that we're supposed to help facilitate, which is an ADU in the backyard, which I don't mind it necessarily. I don't have a problem with that, and it still took him a year to get that permit. So, and along the way, there's all kinds of crazy things being asked of him by the city that aren't part of the legislation. And he had to talk to 8 different fiefdom heads, planning, building, flood, creeks. Everybody's got their knives out on applicants when they come in, and that's not appropriate. So if somebody wants to demonize me for saying that it's too hard to get a permit, I don't know what to say. So it's difficult. So and it's easy to I guess target people that are applicants or my clients as being motivated by profit. I guess what else is new?
Yeah.
Hey, one thing I want to say though, which is ironic. So the big part of AUD that I would change is that it needs to be for condos as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's no difference in what the building looks like, whether it's an apartment or a condo. And when you're talking about developers will continue to get rich and wealthy if they own the real estate. If it's condos, then the equity that is realized over time in those units goes to the buyer.
Yeah.
And so we ought to be helping people get into those units for rent or for sale, and have a balance of those that are for sale. So those people that are in our workforce can have equity in that unit, and they can do a lot of things with that equity, one of which is retire someday.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, just back to basics on land use and encouraging home ownership. Home ownership is what improves neighborhoods. I'm sorry, somebody's going to hate me for saying that, but it's true. Factually, statistically, you're more invested in your neighborhood if you have money tied up in the property and you're more actively involved in its maintenance and care. So we've lost sight of that. And it's ironic that this city council doesn't want to incentivize ways to take the equity that a developer creates and distribute it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know you don't hear much conversation about that much in terms of condo or home ownership, or helping first-time homeowners be able to get the financing to, secure the gap between what they have and, the down payment needed kind of thing. You don't really see that.
We used to do that, and I think I think that'll become part of an AUD amendment at some point, that it would apply to condos, but I don't know why we haven't done it yet. Yeah.
Hey, quickly, 2 minutes, and I didn't give you a heads up that I was going to ask you this because I just thought about it. So if you want to plead the fifth, I understand. But the Picasso thing has gotten a lot of attention. This company that has bought homes, and then they're selling fractional ownership, and you can own up to 1/8. And I wrote some stories on it. Massive web hits. People have all kinds of opinion on this. And there's at least one homeowner nearby who's started this no Picasso thing. And I talked to the person who actually owns 1/8 of it, and they're like, our kids go to UCSB, and what do you want us to do? Buy a home and leave it vacant for the whole year? At least we're sharing it with other people who are using it. But do you have any thoughts on that whole fractional ownership in the neighborhoods? And is this just part of the problem? Good, free market, they can do it. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess when we started to regulate the vacation rental market, it seemed to me to be ultimately it was a good use of our time to regulate vacation rentals out of single family neighborhoods, because I do think a lot of people would take advantage of that. And we have to figure out what we want. If we want hotels for TOT revenue, and we want tourists, then we ought to be facilitating more hotel construction. And it's okay at the same time to limit the ability for people to do VRBOs. I think the Picasso thing, I don't quite know enough about it, but I think it's an interesting argument. Look, and there are a lot of vacant homes in Santa Barbara. Mm-hmm. We could have a residential vacancy tax too. Don't quote me on that.
All right. Jay Higgins is calling for it.
Yeah. So, but I get that argument, but ultimately I don't think I buy it. I think that, single family homes are for families and not for vacations. So I fall on the side of, if we need to create a urgency ordinance to limit people's ability to do that, that's probably a good thing, but let's make it a fairly quick moratorium, and then if it needs to be extended, extend it, but we need to be realizing and putting into practice something that is an incentive that meets the disincentive.
Yeah. Okay.
Carrot and the stick. So.
Yeah. Well said, Jay. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you and all your work on the Planning Commission. And as a reporter who's covering these meetings, I really like how you are precise and on point, and you don't ramble for 2 hours just so you can hear
That's
yourself
the
talk.
first time I should introduce you to my wife.
Well, I know we're always
anybody's ever said I don't ramble, but I appreciate that. I try to
relatively speaking, you don't ramble to some of the people who've been on the Planning Commission over the years. So I appreciate your precise points that you make on these issues. It helps me as a journalist understand these, because you guys are the smart ones. I'm trying to understand it quickly and explain it. And all your involvement with your architectural walks and things that you've organized, and your planning and your land use events and all the stuff you do in the community that not everyone knows about, but people are aware that you care and you are involved. And appreciate your time. Appreciate your time.
Well, I look forward to doing more of those community engagement sort of educational classes next year, because this is my last year on the commission. I'm not going to seek reappointment. I think it's healthy for the commission to have maximum term limits like we do on the council. So looking forward to somebody else taking over and me getting back to my day job.
So you're not going to try to seek 12, 16 years? No
way. It's been very, very educational, and mostly, I think, significant majority of the time, really fun. A couple of ups and downs, but that's what happens when you get a group of people together on a nonprofit board of directors, effectively. So yeah, it's generally been really, really great, and I'm grateful for the experience. So
good. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll see you doing a whole bunch of 100 million things down the road too. So thanks a lot, Jay. Have a great day. Take care.